Not far from the cathedral in St Asaph is the ancient borough of Rhuddlan. Rhuddlan was founded in the 13th century by King Edward I in order to protect the ford over the River Clwyd, the main route from the kingdoms of North Wales into England. In a sense, it was so important that Rhuddlan Castle actually became for a while the capital of England, because Edward governed the country, both England and Wales, from this place, living here for about 3 years at least. It was the first of the great castles built by King Edward I, and he was joined here by his wife, Eleanor of Castile, who is said to have laid out a series of magnificent gardens. Today, Rhuddlan Castle is nothing more than a ruin. Its glory has passed, the splendour has fallen. And if you come here, it's well worth a visit. There's lots to see, but its significance, its power has completely gone. Everything it has is no more than memories. Just across the town from Rhuddlan Castle is St Mary's Church in Rhuddlan, another magnificent building, another building actually built by King Edward I. And I suppose the danger is that people will begin to treat our churches just like our castles, that they're a memory of power that has passed away, that they hold significance for the past, but not for the present. And people might start to say, oh gosh, once upon a time people used to come to this church for things like weddings. Once upon a time they used to believe that God would bless them if they came to worship here. Are our churches fated to become like our castles? Could we even be handing them over to the state to care for them as historic artifacts which have no meaning or purpose in the present day? At the Diocesan Conference this year, I invited our representatives to tell me in 3 little words just what it was they thought that the Church stood for. What is it that is obvious when you come into our churches that we represent? The jargon in the advertising industry is super simplification. Unless you can say it very simply and very clearly, then people just won't get the message. So what is it exactly that our people are getting when they come to visit us? What is it that we want to make obvious about why the Church exists? At the Diocesan Conference, most of the people came up with slogans which focused on the idea of God's love. Slogans that were chosen were things like voicing God's love, sharing God's love with the world, extending Christ's welcome. And this is quite right. It's something that really is very close to the heart of the gospel message. But of course, herein lies the challenge. Is the idea of communicating God's love something that our churches take seriously? If a visitor were to join us for worship on a Sunday morning, would God's love be the thing that was immediately obvious to them upon arrival? When people come into our church, what is the sort of welcome that they receive? When they're in church, what is the worship like that they experience? And do both these things, the welcome and the worship, speak obviously of God's love? Of course, the words we use in our liturgy are all about the love of God revealed in Jesus Christ. But perhaps more important than the words is the behaviour. When people come to church, how do they see us behaving with each other? How do they see us behaving in front of God? Even more importantly, how do they see us behaving in the community? And how do we behave towards the visitors themselves? I'm genuinely impressed by the number of new things going on in our churches. Messy church, cafe church, exploring faith. All these things are expressions of how the church is trying to demonstrate God's love by practical engagement. Then there's our sacramental life, putting people in touch with God through inspiring worship, grace and healing offered and received, even at times of sadness or of joy or of new beginnings. All these things are designed to speak about God's love. But we need to think deliberately and carefully, how are we coming across? In our 2020 Vision Initiative, Unlocking Our Potential, we're reminding all our churches that it's possible to reflect God's love in our communities today. It really doesn't matter whether you're a small rural sanctuary out in the wilds of the diocese, or whether you're a large urban church close to the centre of an urban community. There are appropriate ways for you to be able to develop a practical expression of God's love, a new way of welcoming people into your community and demonstrating that God loves them. And indeed, the whole point behind the mission areas is the idea that if we work together, we can find new ways to do just that. That clergy working with clergy can inspire and encourage one another. That clergy working with congregations can share ministry and vision. That congregations working together can steal good ideas from one another and discover new practices and new initiatives to demonstrate that God's love is real and alive today. I've always said that one of my favourite scriptures is when Jesus says to us, "I came that you may have life, and life in all its abundance." And of course he also said, "By this shall all people know that you are my disciples, that you love one another." And that really is the challenge. When people come to our churches, are they struck immediately with an impression that we are a community of God's love? How do we demonstrate, how do we show to our visitors that we really do believe that we are communicating God's love to the modern world? Well, Advent is beginning and Christmas is coming soon. And I suppose I'd like to ask you the question, what will you do differently this year in your celebration of Advent and Christmas in order to make sure that visitors do have a sense that you're a living community, open and communicating God's love, a community worth living for, a community worth perhaps even belonging to?